So this brings us to the old St. Peter's. The St. Peter's that we see today in Rome is, of course, the second construction of St. Peter's. Under the rule of Constantine, we see the old St. Peter's being built, and we see recreation of it here. Constantine sees a need for a church in Rome itself. They need room for the liturgy and room for growing numbers. And it's very common for major construction to take place on the site of Christian martyrs. And here we see the construction that had taken place prior. We have the Vatican necropolis. We have the Vatican grottos, which were part of the original St. Peter's. We see the present basilica and the old St. Peter's Basilica, all basically sitting one on top of the next. And this is the greatest of Constantine's commissions. It's believed that Peter is buried here. There had been a small shrine at the site since at least the 2nd century, and was built to house between 3,000 and 4,000 people, which would have been massive at the time compared to their population, but of course it was meant to grow. And it's built to look a lot like a Roman civic basilica. When we look at the structure, let's ignore the narthex and the atrium, etc. for now. And when we look at the rest of the structure, what we have is basically a rectangle with an apse, just like our Roman basilica, this is really the oldest form of church, and there are 3 forms of churches that you'll be expected to know. This is the first, the Basilica Form. And we see that, I'm catching up with my notes here, we see that it's meant to house relics. It's meant for pilgrims to come in. Another feature of it, which is unusual to us, but it's very common to early churches, is the atrium. Basically a large enclosed courtyard as part of the church. This would be used for community functions. Inside, it would have looked a lot like some of the churches, the early churches that we see in Rome. So at the top, we have a clerestory to bring in light. That's the windows here that are above the roof line. And then inside, we have the sanctuary at the back of the church from our perspective. This would be the nave that we're looking down. And then out here, these are called the aisles. And the interior would have been quite lavish at the time. In fact, this is Santa Sabina, but I'm using it as an example. And the old St. Peter's would have had murals running on the walls here, on both sides, as well as up in the sanctuary itself. We know that one side had Old Testament murals, one side had New Testament murals. The apse is there to establish the authority of Rome, to start to establish that idea of papal primacy, or the Pope being in charge of the church. By incorporating the apse, it basically says that the Pope, that the Bishop of Rome, has all of the power of the Roman emperors. And then there would have been a sort of covering, a canvas covering up here near the front, known as a baldacchino, which would have marked the spot of St. Peter's tomb. We see that in the new St. Peter's today.